Good morning, all. Sorry about the whole no show thing last week. I was more than anything ridiculously burnt out, and while I was trying to make sure I had something fairly presentable, my weekend, when I normally write, record, and edit this show, was fairly hellacious with back-to-back emotional body blows. And frankly, every story I wanted or felt obliged to cover was an emotional blender on its own, or required an absolute mountain of research. Just for an example, you know that thing last week about how the DHS lawyer said she wanted a judge almost to find her in contempt of court so she could get like 24 hours of sleep in jail? Yeah, she actually mega sucks because that comment was buried in a few dozen page transcript connecting to a second few dozen page transcript where the judge details how the same lawyer ignored more than 7 judicial orders to release one man. She tried to punt the blame to, well, literally any and everyone else. A paralegal, an email server, ICE just not listening to her despite several bold fonted emails because that's... Look, she wanted credit for I'm the person you want in there because I'm trying to get them to do the right thing by sending bold fonted emails. But you could also just go check out Lawfare or Law Dork, both of whom have amazing coverage I would actually quite recommend, for exactly that, by people whose whole job is covering court reporting. Oh, and Balls and Strikes, if you're looking for something generally focused on higher courts and judges specifically. But, yeah, look, a lot of the stories last week required way more research than even that. And welcome to Muttday Morning News. I'm the titular Mutt Fen. Now let's get to some news. I'm just going to have to start all my shows with a discussion of the Epstein crap for the foreseeable future, aren't I? Well, welcome to my Epstein Class segment. I've been gone for a week, and so much happened and keeps happening. Problem is, I'm kind of boiling in this awful, so I've accidentally disconnected from what most of y'all do or don't know. Put it another way, I've become that XKCD comic average familiarity if you subbed knowing about something cool like geochemistry for knowing more than I ever wanted to about a child rapist and the cult of the wealthiest people on the planet, high-level university administrators and professors, and their would-be influencer hangers-on who've spent the last 20 years making the world a worse place for everyone but them. To that end, if you have or even haven't heard about any of the Epstein cruft I'm about to explain, please tell me in the comments. I guess whichever of those lists is shorter? I'd rather not inundate y'all with stuff you already know going forward, so... But where do I begin? As at least one meme said, and now I've independently corroborated with the help of my own community, Trump's name appears in the Epstein files 3 times more than the titular character's name does in those wizard books written by another Epstein billionaire associate. Unlike Trump, there's zero implication Rowling was anything but a distant associate of Epstein's, still willing to invite the convicted child rapist to her Cursed Child Broadway premiere and a private dinner a few days later, but not taking part in the abuse of the women and children openly like the USian dictator, though she has said Lolita is a favorite book of hers while wildly misconstruing the story of a child's grooming and rape as a romance, and she is the primary money behind pushing transphobia in the UK, so... and let's not forget, that's another bit from the files. In them, Epstein and his associates not just admit to, but can be seen actively conspiring to conjure the anti-trans movement of the 2010s and onward to shift the blame for their child rape gang onto us instead of them. I wonder if that's why we're now up to 3 different New York Times reporters in the files. To learn more about the New York Times active pushing of baseless transphobia on orders from their executives, please go check out the Trans News Network's article from January 1st, link in the description. Oh, they also have another article from February 6th on the scientific, economic, political, and academic leaders who pushed anti-trans policies after visiting Epstein and, in some cases, his child predator island, also in the description. Last episode, I mentioned how Moot, the 4chan founder, was convinced by Epstein to bring back the /poll board, which eventually gave rise to Gamergate and QAnon. But there's just so many others, like Richard Dawkins and Lawrence Krauss, eminent scientists in evolutionary biology and physics, respectively. Actually, evolutionary biologists in particular seem to have flocked to transphobia, and Epstein in particular, but let's not read into that. I bring them up because Richard Dawkins was personally responsible for driving women and feminism out of the early 2000s skeptic movement, after which the movement would go on to fan the flames of Gamergate, Flat Earth, and climate denialism. Yes, if you're being really reductive, which I am doing for comedic effect, you can indeed blame the entire modern right-wing influencer environment on Richard Dawkins. Look up Elevator Gate, or just check out the Dawkins chapter of Sean's video covering Lawrence Krauss's recent book, The War on Science. Heck, if you have time, it is like 4 hours long. Go watch the whole video, but look, nearly every one of the 30-some-odd authors, I don't remember exactly how many they are, I think it's supposed to be 39, but at least one of them's counted twice, are leaders in their respective scientific or academic fields. Well, the ones who haven't since been kicked out of those fields, though sadly it's not as many as you'd expect. Nearly all of them are in the Epstein files, some called Jeffrey a close friend, even after his 2009 conviction for the rape and prostitution of a child. Admittedly, only one of the more than 36 he had been credibly accused of abusing before that point, but who's counting? And they're all in Lawrence Krauss's book to push white supremacy, patriarchy, and transphobia. Weird that all traces back to Jeffrey Epstein again. Okay, who else shows up in the file? Well, how about Bobby Kotick, ex-CEO of Activision Blizzard? Folks have joked that Epstein came up with the idea for microtransactions and then pitched them to Kotick, but no. He was actually acting as a go-between between Joel Klein, a former Clinton lawyer, and Chancellor of the New York Department of Education, who was proposing the idea to Epstein as a method of conditioning children. In 2013, 4 years after Epstein was convicted of raping a child. No, I think it's actually just quite important to point out that Bobby Kotick was in the Epstein's little black book from hell. In fact, he's actually one of the earliest to get into old Jeffrey's DMs all the way back in 1991. Hang on. That's a joke. Let me explain. For some reason, a lot of the emails involving ex-Miami Mayor Philip Levine, who has also claimed to have almost no connections to Epstein despite being all over the files, are kind of borked and have screwy and sometimes hidden or broken dates. So the earliest it could have been from was 1991, when Kotick became Activision CEO, and when Ghislaine Maxwell, who even Philip Levine admits was his friend and the excuse why he has any connection at all to Epstein, also met Epstein. The first verifiably dated email between the shitweasel and the predatory financier, please take a guess which one I mean by which we've thus far seen, was in 2004 and implies Maxwell and Epstein had been waiting to hear from Kotick for quite a while. I bring up that email not because anything in particular is said in it, but rather to bring up that year, 2024. You know, one of the things other than child rape and human trafficking and prostitution that Epstein has been credibly accused of? Being a fixer, such as in the FBI report, also in the Epstein files, where a victim of Epstein's alleged that in 1984, while she was being trafficked by Epstein, she was 13 and pregnant, gave birth, and when her daughter was born, Epstein saw to her death personally and her body's disposal in Lake Michigan. Allegedly, Donald Trump was also present on the yacht at the same time and witnessed it. So, let me remind you, Bobby Kotick, the man who continued to connect with Jeffrey Epstein after his 2009 conviction, who invited the child rapist and his girls into his home, and the man who definitely knew of the culture of sexual abuse, harassment, and discrimination at Activision Blizzard, and has even accused the employee union of fabricating the rapist culture he'd fostered for years. That's not an exaggeration, by the way. There are multiple accusations from within Blizzard of higher-ups raping their employees. Activision Blizzard is a fucked up place, and you should stop giving them money. Yeah, that Bobby Kotick, he threatened to have his assistant killed in 2006. I wonder who he had in mind to finish that job and clean up after it. Oh, but we are not done with the Epstein class yet. See, that's the key wording there. It's not just the Epstein files, but the Epstein class. What about all the folks who aren't even in them, but who are doing their damnedest to make sure no one who is in them ever faces the barest consequences? Well, for one, we have Pam Bondi, the Attorney General of the United States, previously most well known for stealing a 4-year-old's dog, then suing them. Not to be confused with Kristi Noem, who executed a 14-month-old puppy named Cricket. No, that's not an allegation. She's admitted to that one. If you didn't see her little tantrum in front of Congress, I'm referring to Bondi again, just to be clear, on the 11th, let me share some of the highlights. The hearing was, naturally, about the DOJ's failure to prosecute or even investigate anyone in the Epstein files. So, of course, Bondi spent the entire time caterwauling about the U.S. stock market. Clearly the most important topic for the Attorney General. Do we not have a Secretary of Commerce? Oh, right, it's Howard Lutnick. One particularly funny point about that was how she claimed no one should be allowed to accuse her of any sort of wrongdoing, or anyone in the administration, so long as the Dow Jones Industrial Average was for the first time above 50,000. The Dow has since dropped below 50,000 by the next morning. No, let's bring up the wrongdoing just specifically from this hearing on her DOJ's handling of the Epstein investigation and files. If you've read any articles on the hearing, you probably saw something about the Dems' fixation on dragging an apology out of Bondi. I'm not sure why so many so-called journalists are framing it that way when both Representative Pramila Jayapal and Dan Goldman, both of Washington, on separate occasions did not, in fact, ask Bondi to apologize to the present survivors, but asked the survivors present to raise their hands if they had been outright ignored by the DOJ. Every single one did. The abuses they suffer were never investigated. Pam Bondi and Biden's Attorney General, Merrick Garland, chose not to investigate or even respond to the victims of this country's largest sex trafficking ring since slavery was abolished. That's not merely negligence, that's evil. But then this is Pam Bondi, the same woman who, at a hearing about her handling of the Epstein investigation,
Yeah, I'm stunned that you want to continue talking about...
Oh my gosh, okay.
Ignored questions from Democrats, instead screaming like a howler monkey until the next Republican's turn, who'd throw her a nothing burger of a question so she could check her little burn book and throw slights at the previous Democrat who wouldn't be able to speak over her now. Oh, and there was also a fun little moment where she tried to sidestep Vermont Rep. Becca Balance question whether Trump knew of Howard Lutnick's Epstein connections, since his DOJ had emails showing Lutnick had not only a close connection, but had visited the child predator's private island. She attempted to instead bring up an unrelated Border Patrol agent, and then... well, she just started kind of screaming after Ballant naturally concluded, and I quote, "Okay, I'm going to conclude that the president did, in fact, know about his ties." Personally, I would like to know why no one even pretends the Attorney General of the United States is trying to sweep the largest child rape gang under the rug. But then half her coworkers have been to Epstein's Island and made his victims their own, so maybe that's a foolish question. But I am sadly not done with the monsters this week because, while I did briefly bring up Kristi Noem and her puppy murder, I did not bring up the newly revealed facts that keep coming to light about her Department of Homeland Security. Or, like the fact that she, not threatened, fired a pilot for not bringing her blanket before having to rehire the pilot so that she could get home. Yes, that also happened last week. While we've seen multiple agents commit murder live on video, not every member of Noem's department loves sharing their snuff films publicly. AP News found at least 9 ICE employees who've committed crimes heinous enough to actually warrant arrest over the last 12 months. And again, that's just ICE, not the Customs and Border Patrol or Customs and Border Protection agents who killed Alex Pretty, or any of the other agents like, say, Jonathan Ross, who murdered Renee Nicole Good, because we just live in hell now. Of those 9, nearly every one of them was accused of sexual assault, physical assault, or sexual assault of a minor. But don't worry, there is that one ICE agent who I actually reported on too, who was only arrested for driving drunk and then threatening to have the officer who stopped him deported. So, no, they're not all rapists and abusers. Some are merely wildly dangerous to everyone around them. That's, of course, why Noem flew out to Arizona to hold a press conference the day before her department's budget ran dry, reiterating a threat that the Trump administration would be sending and setting armed ICE agents at polling locations, a threat Trump himself had previously made and Noem really tried to knuckle down on. I'll also remind you that this is what Tom Homan, the border czar who accepted a $50,000 bribe and was never investigated under the Biden administration, because, again, we live in hell, also refused to pull out ICE agents from Minnesota until they have given over the entire voting record and control over polling locations and kiboshed all of the existing sanctuary city, state, and other municipality laws within the entire state. It's almost like the GOP keeps trying to gain direct control over elections because they know that's the only way they win, because that's the only way they've won since fucking Reagan. I should reiterate that bit too, that the Department of Homeland Security itself has run through its budget, meaning the Coast Guard and TSA, who, okay, the TSA we could honestly do without because we all know they're security theater, but whatever, are going without pay. ICE, however, are not. They are still sitting pretty with that $75 billion from the disgusting budget bill last year, though allegedly they are planning on using nearly $40 billion of that to convert warehouses into yet more concentration camps. So that's great. I mean, we already have plenty of concentration camps, more than we should ever need, especially since we're going to keep pretending they're not concentration camps, but whatever, as disease runs rampant through those. But since ICE and the GOP, and especially Trump's entire goal is openly stated to be an ethnic cleansing, that's kind of exactly what they and Noem crave. Oh, and let's not forget the latest news out of Dilley, Texas, and its special children's concentration camp. Sure, the children who Noem's DHS have not quite yet managed to murder, though they have successfully killed some. Yes, they absolutely have. There are so many children in the Dilley concentration camp who are scared, sick, being regularly fed moldy and worm-filled food when they are fed. But just this week, we also learned that CoreCivic, the private corporation who run the Dilley concentration camp, used this most recent Thanksgiving to torture children and their parents with a method copied directly from the Nazi death camps. At least they're open about their inspirations. The families and children at Dilley, after weeks of sickening, moldy food that was quite literally making children vomit, were sat before an expansive table covered in Thanksgiving fixings and made to wait and stare at it. Once they began asking when they could eat, their captors informed them it was not for them. It was for the camp's employees, who then began to pack the feast up directly in front of them and take it away, because the entire point was to make them see it and know that it was being denied to them intentionally. I do have one singular news story about anyone at all facing consequences for their association with and defense of notorious child predator Jeffrey Epstein. And it has to do with the UK's premier dinosaur convention, Dino Con, because of course it does. It's so utterly refreshing, I'm going to read out their entire damn statement. We at Dino Con take the safety of our attendees, speakers, and staff very seriously. As a result of the release of half of the Epstein files, it has come to light that a select number of scientists, authors, and researchers relevant to the field of paleontology allegedly engaged in correspondence with members of the Epstein organization after the conviction of Jeffrey Epstein. We want to state that all respective individuals are banned from our events. The fact that that's more than any government, investigator, or even remotely similar organization, in fact, at least one paleontological organization specifically refused to do this, which is why Dino Con made the announcement, has it's damning enough on its own. Just on its own, that is damning. But I didn't even read you the whole statement yet. No, because it continues. Additionally, we find it deplorable that some established paleontological organizations are not taking firm action to protect their members in light of these allegations. As such, executive committee members from organizations that are not issuing public bans to these individuals are also banned from our events. We do not tolerate those who allow this behavior to go unchallenged within our community. Again, it's just so refreshing. But then if we did that here in the US, basically every billionaire, most millionaires, and nearly every federal level politician would be banned from, well, basically everywhere. And the entire world would be objectively better for it. So maybe we should do it anyway. Okay, all that Epstein crap was probably the angriest a story has ever made me. So let's see if I can keep the rest of this, well, relatively chill. Aside from the Discord story I'll have to get to soon enough. Yeah, I'm talking about it, don't worry. Since we live in a hell, just a hell where the US military is being given record-breaking sums of cash, and the dictator of the United States has already kidnapped one sovereign leader under false pretenses, while simultaneously threatening to annex or otherwise attack or claim Canada, Greenland, Cuba, and Iran. Obviously, that money is being spent well, right? No, obviously not. This is the US military we're talking about. On the 11th, the FAA ordered all flights in and around El Paso grounded for the next 10 days, giving no reason. When pressed by Texas state and El Paso municipal officials, the FAA had no explanation. Shortly after those inquiries began, the FAA order was mercifully rescinded. With such a wide order in place, it even grounded all military flights. Folks were, rightly, scared. Unsure if they were going to be the target of Trump's next attempt at an ethnic cleansing. That does actually appear to be LA is the new focus for an ICE surge. I'm so sorry. Other speculation was new nuclear testing at the White Sands Missile Range, or the administration stepping on its own sagging testicles. Again, surprising, well, almost no one. It was the latter. It was a party balloon. No, seriously, the entire thing was over a party balloon. The Trump administration ordered the 6th largest municipality in Texas shut down and effectively cut off from the rest of the country for 10 days because they shot down a party balloon. They have since claimed the balloon was a cartel drone taken down by their laser defense systems. Look, that is bullshit, and obviously so. Remember, this is the same administration openly murdering Venezuelans and their own citizens, then sharing the snuff videos on their own personal X accounts. If they had actually shot down a cartel drone, or even just a drone, even if it had just been some fuckwit's goddamn quadcopter, they would be lining up to take their pictures with it. The fact that they're not, yeah, it was a party balloon, and they're trying to cover their asses after, again, stepping on their own sagging testicles. You know, you can just get an orchiotomy, y'all. It's much easier. Okay, let's get the worst tech news done first. While I was gone for a week, Discord announced a global rollout of its age verification requirements starting in March. Naturally, folks were pissed, since age verification does nothing to protect children from predators who are, more often than not, though not always, their own family members, or those already listed in the Epstein files. The DOJ, sheriff's departments, state law enforcement agencies, and local police categorically refuse to investigate. What age verification systems are quite good at doing, though, is providing buckets of data to Discord to do with what they please. Sure, they claim the ID and face scans never leave your PC, but we already know that's a lie, because they got hacked last year. They literally are the reason why 70,000 Australian Discord users have now had their IDs compromised. Oh, and because they've removed the language from their agreements about that information never leaving your PC, because they've dropped their previous and easily exploitable face-scanning AI system for Persona. No, not the Atlas game. If you've never heard of them, well, all you really need to know is that they're backed by Peter Thiel. He's also one of the primary backers of crypto, generative AI, and NFTs, so you know he's great. The techno-fascist behind Palantir, among others, the US government's go-to provider of the racial profiling regurgitative AIs, ICE has been using to justify who they target. So it's obviously incredibly safe for all of us for a Thiel company to want the IDs of every single global Discord user. There's so many privacy violations there. And let's not forget about all the lawsuits Persona is currently embroiled in for violations of existing privacy laws, just here in the US, but also outside of it too. But what if you want the best evidence Persona is unquestionably evil? Well, I also have that too. See, last year, Dave Baszucki, the CEO of noted pedophile hellscape Roblox, dove headfirst into boiling water on the New York Times Hard Fork podcast when he was asked about the platform's documented issues with sexual predators, such as the more than 13,000 Roblox itself admitted to knowing about in 2023. Baszucki dodged the question repeatedly until finally admitting, quote, "We think of it not necessarily just as a problem, but an opportunity as well." The opportunity being twofold: the obvious profit they turn from the predators they continue to allow on their platform, knowingly, and the new age verification system Baszucki was theoretically there to hype up, which was, yes, obviously it was Persona. I'll say it every time I talk about age verification news, but these systems are not built to protect children. Yes, that is the claim. Stop taking claims at face value. The claim is and has always been fictitious. Age verification systems only facilitate abuse. They, like book bannings, are not about protecting children, but controlling children, hiding information from them so that they can be abused without them being able to identify that abuse as such. That's also why, for the exact same reason as those book bannings, every one of the "we need age verification" laws specifically applies the delightfully hateful phrasing of content that is harmful to minors instead of obscene, because we have these fun laws in the US called obscenity laws, defining what is and is not free speech. Being visibly queer is not that. It is, however, according to certain states, content harmful to minors, which means it needs to be age-gated, like, say, every queer Discord server in the US. Knowledge is power. Share it well. Remember to cancel your Discord Nitro and set up alternative contact methods for your friends, because this is going to be bad, y'all. Okay, what other tech news can I cover that won't be depressing? Ooh, what's Elonguous Muskrat been up to? Well, he's apparently given up on Mars. Musk first claimed he'd have boots on the red planet within 10 years, 15 years ago. But with rockets that won't stop exploding, Musk has decided the moon is no longer the distraction he once dubbed it. Landing someone on the moon is still a technically impressive feat, even if it was first done 67 years ago, but Musk, as always, just needs to be seen as a trendsetter. Naturally, he couldn't just promise his rockets would stop exploding and actually reach Luna, but that in less than 10 years, SpaceX will have built a self-growing city on the moon, complete with mass drivers. Yes, I did say self-growing, not self-sustaining, because that was his word too, because of course it wouldn't be self-sustaining. How would SpaceX charge inhabitants through the nose for the food, water, air, and materials a lunar colony would need to survive if it was self-sustainable? I'm also not even gonna touch the mass drivers thing. It's absurd and wildly impractical because he's never going to do it? Were I a betting woman, which you know, I'd say it's because a certain class of nerd, you know the ones, obsess over the wildly impractical rods from God style of superweapon as their preferred compensatory wet dream, I suppose. And if I must begrudgingly admit, there is one thing Elonguous knows, it's how to market to men like himself. Ooh, right, I almost forgot. While I was away for a week, Musk also merged SpaceX, his rocketry company, which has never managed to deliver on any of his promises, whose rockets keep exploding, who was just classified as an airline by the GOP-controlled US government as an end run around the Labor Relations Act, and who dropped mountains of cash to buy up thousands of unsold and also returned Cybertrucks just because they're so great and necessary for a rocketry company, and not at all to buoy up Tesla's share price, the source of Musk's own wealth, with his other company, XAI, now most famous for being the only company or person to produce more CSAM than the entire network of child-raping monsters who flocked around Jeffrey Epstein. But then, Musk was also one of those too, so maybe he doesn't count, or maybe he counts double. I feel like double. I mean, no one's going to take him to task for it, so I'm gonna count it as double. Last episode, I ran a story about the autonomous robotaxis Tesla's been field testing in Austin, and how, depending on whose statistics you use, they're at best causing 3 times as many accidents as a USian driver would, or 9 times at worst. I also mentioned that they're not really autonomous. They have, well, had a human sitting in the driver's seat ready to correct any mistakes made by the automatic system. Yes, 9 times the crash rate of a USian driver with a human safety officer sitting in the seat ready to correct. Oh my god, how bad are these at driving? As for the had bit, well, they've pulled the safety officers out of the car and now have them following behind in a second car without making that part of their public policy, so that's creepy and weird, but also seems unhelpful and also remarkably wasteful. Well, I also mentioned Waymo's record, which was better, and now we know why. In a Senate hearing, Waymo admitted, like so many AI systems, there was no system. It was just workers in the global south, in this case particularly the Philippines, paid an utter pittance to remotely operate the vehicles. Especially when they got stuck, because someone just set a street cone on the hood and it just shut down. But Waymo's duplicity does not end there. On the 10th, Reddit user Marzipan Pristine posted this screenshot to r/DoorDasher. They were offered $6.25 with a potential $5 bonus to close the door of a Waymo taxi, which had been left open. That's scummy to begin with, and, kind of a fundamental issue with the whole robot taxi thing. But it hits villainy levels after I remind you that's half of what Waymo was paying DoorDashers to do the same thing back in December. Look, I could run some amount of vet visit stories this week, but since they would all effectively amount to yup, Brainworm Bobby Kennedy's hand-picked anti-vax head of the FDA overruled everyone actually on the vaccine review board to kill life-saving mRNA vaccines. No? Especially since I would have then had to follow it up with some griping about the recent, quote, landmark study, which proved, again, because it wasn't a landmark, but like the 40th study to show the exact same fucking results, namely that trans women have no physical advantages over cis women in sports. I'm just gonna jump right into pet play. Actually, wait. Before I do that, I have a fun fact. This is the first year the International Olympic Committee effectively banned trans women. One of those studies, which has already shown we trans women are no stronger, faster, or whatever than cis women, it was done by the fucking IOC in 2024. In fact, it did not find we had any kind of advantage over cis women. It found we had a disadvantage in nearly every category. But sure, we're disqualified from the IOC. Anyway, pet play, gaming, culture news, let's go. Wait, why does this first story look like it's about the IOC too? Fuck. Yes, even in the culture news, the IOC are deciding to make something of themselves. The International Olympic Committee, not content with sports washing Saudi Arabia's human rights abuses and journalist murdering ways, or their own discrimination of all trans women against the evidence of their own study, decided this was the perfect year to remind everyone that they also helped Hitler push his master race eugenics bullshit. Yes, the IOC decided 2026, the year of USian concentration camps, the year of global fascist movements, the year they officially discriminated against an entire demographic of people. The same year, Haitian teams were forced to remove the face of the man who ended slavery in the country and threw off the yoke of colonial control, was also the perfect year to launch a collection of heritage shirts celebrating, among others, the 1936 Berlin Olympics. The IOC has released a statement defending the shirt on the grounds that some 4,000 athletes took part in the games, and hey, Jesse Owens proved the master race stuff was bullshit, except, it was bullshit. It doesn't need to be proven wrong because it already was wrong. But you see, I'm not reading from their statement, because the sold-out shirts aren't celebrating Jesse Owens or anyone else, any of those athletes. The issue people have is that the IOC is making money selling a t-shirt covered in literal Hitler-approved Nazi propaganda, you fucking melons. On to the video game news, and oh my, I was gone for a week. What the hell's happened in gaming? I mean, okay, Ubisoft has already been laying off studios and torching unions for a couple of weeks now, arguably almost months at this point, but still, there's the whole eugenics thing, which, look, all I'll say on that front is if you don't tell folks they're going to be in a game with rapists, abusers, and an actual ass genocidaire, you either knew it was wrong to do, or you are so unaware as to be a danger to those around you. Anyway, PC Gamer did actual investigative journalism about the Persona Discord deal. Folks rediscovered the Pokestop on Epstein's child torture and rape island. Sega hired an accused rapist to voice act in Yakuza Kiwami 3, the remake of Yakuza 3, which managed to also ruin every good mechanic while deleting multiple side stories, including the only one where Kazuma supports a trans woman, all while making it impossible to buy the original unless you're willing to fork out $130 for a bundle. But then that's been Sega's strategy with Sonic games for years. Oh, and a Battlefield game outsold Call of Duty for the first time ever? And yet somehow the dumbest thing to happen was both Riot and Wildlight gutting their own teams after 2XKO and Highguard respectively failed to spontaneously generate massive player bases. Especially damning for Highguard since they intended to shadow drop it, which would imply you needed massive, sudden, spontaneous adoption, but Riot fired 80 people from the fighting games team, and Wildlight has only said most of the team has been laid off. Maybe the problem isn't that you failed to attract players, because both did attract players. Maybe it's that the executives at both companies who aren't being laid off expected them to attract all the players. So let me offer a few suggestions they'll never listen to, no matter how right they are. First, cut the executives' pay. Clearly their instincts aren't great. Why are you paying them that much to be so wrong? Second, name your game something memorable. I don't read 2XKO and go, oh, that's the Riot fighting game. I read it and have to ask, was that a typo? Don't even get me started on naming your hero shooter with a predatory microtransaction system that looks like you pulled it out of 2013. Overwatch, but we own a thesaurus. Third, and this one is just for 2XKO, maybe don't let your game be played in events where the water is being spiked and the organizers know and ignore the victims. Yes, that happened allegedly multiple times at the Frosty Faustings event 2 weeks ago. Fourth, technically only for Highguard, but also applicable to Riot generally, stop requiring core-level anti-cheat systems to play your free shooter. I legitimately wanted to play Highguard, and then when I needed to download a ridiculous anti-cheat system that wanted direct access to basically every element of my computer. I went, no, it's not worth it. Fifth, and finally, set reasonable expectations. The leaders in a multi-billion-dollar industry should not need to take lessons from fucking DashCon and DashCon 2. But there was at least some good gaming news in the last week. Spirit Swap, the lo-fi match 3 puzzle game / visual novel, has launched a new Kickstarter, not for a video game technically, but for a solo play journaling-based slice-of-life TTRPG. Unlike another TTRPG project I'm pointedly not talking about this very moment, Soft Not Weak, the company behind Spirit Swap, already have the TTRPG mostly done, and have actually laid out their financial breakdown and where the money's going. God, remember when Kickstarters consistently did that? No, obviously not. Most of them don't, but good ones do. The Kickstarter has only been running for a week and has already raised more than $4,000 of their incredibly reasonable $5,000 goal because it's a 40-page zine. It's not a huge thing. So plenty of time to check it out. I would have liked for my final story this week to be a review of The Persephone Effect by Maria Ying, Unlimited Combat Dolls by K.F. Atkinson, or Retooled by Nyamako. But between all the difficulties and mild mental breakdowns I've been having over the last few weeks, I haven't had the time to finish any of them, or even start Unlimited Combat Dolls, sadly. So I'm going to finish this with my first impressions of Relooted, which means I should probably elevator pitch this for you too. Relooted is a game all about stealing back the artifacts colonial powers stole from all across Africa. You play as Nomali, a parkour champion who's just returned from Tanzania to save her dumbass brother, Trevor, from a gang he's stiffed, only for him and your grandmother to recruit Nomali into their heist plans. I've only had time to get about 5 hours in, but in that time, I found the game to be... delightful's the wrong word, but it is kind of my default. It's certainly fun to play, but the narrative, while ever so slightly dissociated from our current world by a few decades, shines its spotlight squarely on the colonial crimes and inequities that underpin our modern world. Kennel Me, the player character's grandmother, lays out the team's, and by extension Relooted itself's, entire reason to exist only a short way in, and while I won't spoil the scene, if it doesn't fill you with equal parts bone-deep sadness and blinding rage, well, I don't know how you watched this far into my show. But thanks, I guess? Nomali's parkour movement system is fun, emphasizing speed and momentum maintenance in a way reminiscent of like a 2D Sonic, though I found the speed boost mechanic to be a little fiddly timing-wise, and her animations, while good at high speed, are a bit floaty when moving at more reasonable speeds. The early voice acting and character performance are also a bit wooden and stilted, but the longer I played, the more that felt like it dropped off. If, like me, you find the first two missions sort of dissonant with each other, like, they're trying to tell you you're playing two very different games, but lacking the tools for one of them, keep playing, at least until Fred joins the team, I promise. It should also be under the 2-hour mark if you're really that hard up to refund it on Steam. See, most of the crew you'll collect allow Nomali to interact with or bypass some, though very pointedly not all, the challenges you'll face on any given heist. For example, Trevor can open safes and some doors, but he can't freely move around the map. He's limited to specific access doors and the areas immediately around them. Where the first mission is all about teaching you Nomali's movement system, the second is more about using Trevor and, by extension, other crew members eventually, which can be a bit of a cognitive gear grind, shifting from speed to a slower, more deliberate, and admittedly a little fiddly and too clicky. It definitely requires more clicks than it feels like it should need. Crew control system. It feels like you're missing something, because to get the full picture of the map or know where you want things set up, you have to physically walk Nomali to wherever you want to check. And Fred is the answer to that. The mechanic he introduces really crystallizes how Relooted wants to be played, and the dissonance in playstyle the game asks the player through the first 3 missions feel like they're intended to make you feel like you're rubbing against rough corners, so Fred can bring everything together. It's a very intentional and clear design space that I quite like. I know that's the first time I brought up the third mission, but that's because it's really quick and short and largely serves to remind you of the first mission style and highlight that point I made about needing to physically traverse the map to see things. Oh, also, Fred's voice actor is a delight and clearly having way too much fun. Honestly, just give Relooted a shot. It has a demo. Just give it a try. Are the animations sometimes a bit off? Especially when you're not moving at full speed? Yes. Is the dialogue sometimes a bit stilted? Also yes. You know what else suffers from both of those qualities? Fallout 4, Skyrim, Oblivion and Oblivion Remastered, Outer Worlds 1 and 2, and every Call of Duty game released in the last decade. But, unlike all of those, Relooted only costs $15 at most. Hell, it launched at $15 instead of $60, $70, or $80, Borderlands 4. It also doesn't fund genocide and generative AI development, and it doesn't treat you like a lobotomized ambulatory wallet, but rather a human being capable of thinking about the game they're playing and what it says about our world. And I will gladly spend $15 for that over whatever the hell Microsoft is pushing out. We made it to the end of the show! Thank you so very much for watching. If you enjoyed, please remember to leave a like, a comment, all the stuff you know you're supposed to. Subscribe to the channel. Dingle the bingle if you wanted YouTube to actually tell you when my new stuff shows up. Yeah, all that good stuff. Again, I'm sorry to miss a week like that, but the everything started to get to me a bit, and I had 2 different girls demand that I take care of myself, so... Look, I don't listen to my own body, but I will listen when girls tell me things, okay? As for my streaming schedule for this upcoming week, this week is a bit light, but mostly because last week was a bit heavy, plus that whole, my dog developed an autoimmune disease, and that's a whole ordeal on its own. Look, if you've never had to very suddenly start cooking for your dog, it's a very weird shift, okay? Tonight, we'll be watching more Spy X Family in the Discord. All times, by the way, are at MST, so this is 6 p.m. MST. I'm really not looking forward to finding another way to do those movie nights. Ugh. Plus, a Nier Automata stream on Wednesday at 1 p.m., and an early Digimon Beat Break and Zero Ranger stream on Friday. You haven't heard my fairly silly pitch for those. I'm doing them the mornings of my estrogen injections, which I have to do every 5 days, so they're just kind of a silly thing I'm doing, mostly to incentivize myself and get some community involvement, because Beat Break is fun, and I like playing Zero Ranger, and once I'm done with Zero Ranger, I can go play Void Stranger on stream, so hey. Thank you all so very much. Have a good morning, evening, afternoon, time zone, what have you, and I will see you soon. And thank you very much to all of my supporters. Everything I do, written, video, or streamed, it's all brought to you by viewers, readers, and listeners like you over on patreon.com/fen and coffee.com/fen as just for as little as $1 a month. So thank you especially to April, Fragile Paper, Pinball Witch, Pimento, Rose, Writer Princess, and Yalk. I quite literally could not do this without all of your support. Thank you so very much. And yeah, I'll hopefully see all of you again soon. Bye!